that I've seen happening, and which gave me a sort of insight into things that are going on that maybe we don't talk about enough. When my children were, as I call it, kidnapped by their father in 2016, legally it's been downgraded to child abduction and then completely erased by the Hague Convention, but I will still maintain, what happened. I was pushed into the position of being English personally. I was representing, having to go through courts in another country, in Croatia. And even though I speak Croatian and I'd spent some years living there, I felt really disadvantaged because I wasn't natural with the language, especially not when it comes to sort of legal situations. And then when you're sort of dealing with a public administration in another country, that feels really complicated. But there's the cultural layer as well. I remember one time my ex chatting very conversationally with a social worker about basketball and matches, and I was a bit like, this is not something I can participate in. And it just sort of brought home to me how when you're operating in a culture where you feel othered, and I know there's a wonderful academic, Sonia Ayub Carlson, I don't know if she's on this call, who's done a lot of work about the intersection of family law and migration issues, and she talks about this being othered. I know what it feels like. So then, when you're somebody from a racial or ethnic or national group that doesn't belong, what that feels like. So I'd like to share some information which I think might be quite shocking, and once I'm done, I would really like to hear from other people what their own experiences are, because I expect there might be people on the call who've been through similar things. And so I believe for several reasons that family courts are an instance of the modern slave trade. If anybody's not on mute, if they wouldn't mind popping themselves on mute because it's a bit noisy. For example, just one sort of instance, I had to follow my children to Croatia to fight through the courts for them, and ended up stuck there for years without work. And my ex was working. There was a period when he was living in my family's property with us after taking the children, after seeking divorce, not giving me a penny towards housekeeping. I was slogging, trying to bring some money in, doing bits and bobs of translation work, whatever I could find, and taking care of the children. And I felt like a slave. I felt like his slave. And I think a lot of Hague mothers will feel like that when they're, forced into a position where they are really financially disadvantaged just because the children's father won't give them the freedom to move to home where they can find work and have their support networks. But I'll move on from that. That's kind of a little bit of a lower order of some of the really serious stuff I'm going to talk about. So I'm in Croatia, and lots of really weird things are going on. In 2022, I had a court hearing, the final court hearing, having lost my child abduction case in Croatia for very, very, very bizarre reasons, which really look like abuse of power, very clearly. Then final custody hearing. I'm supposed to be in a courtroom with 6 people who are under investigation by the Croatian Office for Anti-Corruption and Organised Crime following my reports. This was about a serious data breach. So it was my ex-husband involved, his lawyer, and 4 social workers who gave him or his lawyer or somebody associated with them an enormous pile of unredacted documents, including my confidential health documents. This will be a familiar situation to many people, I'm sure. The children's wishes and feelings are to return home with mum, which they always have been. Social services previously recommended that I have full custody due to his behaviour towards the children. Then after that, then there was this data breach and abrupt change of tack, which resulted in allegations of alienation, not against the father, because the children have a good relationship with their father, but against the Croatian part of their family. Well, most of my children's Croatian part of their family are on my side, so I'm not sure what that was all about. But yes, like somebody else mentioned before, because I was complaining about violations of the legal rights of my children and I was called delusional. Was it delusional? Was it paranoid? I can't remember. One of those, anyway. I was a bit like, well, what took you so long? It's only taken 6 years. Now I've got the badge of honour. Anywho, the judgment came out awarding custody to the father. I can't even read that judgment because it's really traumatizing. And if I'm honest with you, I consider it scrap paper. I think that these judgments should be voided. Seriously, I'm not joking. Then in December 2022, there was a report came out that 8 Croatian nationals had been apprehended in Zambia on child trafficking charges. They had been caught trying to take 8 children who were nationals of the Democratic Republic of Congo via Zambia to Croatia. This was serious news, not least because those individuals were connected with organizations like the Zagreb city government, the local government, the entertainment industry, and this had been organized by a woman who used to work in the Croatian intelligence services. And there was involvement. Oh yeah, I think one of the other prospective adoptive parents was also somebody involved in the Croatian justice system. So looking quite serious. Yeah, and this newspaper, what's it, front page, this is Jutarnji List, the morning something or other. It's one of the 2 major Croatian national daily newspapers. This is the first of a series of 6 depth investigations on the Congo scandal, which came out in June 2023. And I'm pretty sure that very, very few of you have heard about this. So I thought that I might help out by giving publicity a little bit of a boost. So yeah, this is it. This is what I just mentioned, how my case is mixed up in it. I feel sorry for this guy in this picture. This is the judge, Neven Kucej, in a little village called Donja Stubica, which is actually where my parents bought a property. And I was living for some time, and that's where the child custody case ended up, and the child abduction case, because my ex took the children back there and moved into our property when he took the children. This man has a reputation locally for, this is a small village, it's like 4,000 people or something. So I know people who know him and have known them all his lives. He's been a judge for many years. He has been called incorruptible and a great friend of women and children. And initially he, without hesitation, ordered the return of my children under the Hague Convention, exactly as he should have. But then my ex explicitly told me that he would interfere with the Croatian court process. He's a former intelligence services official. He has extensive connections with Croatian politicians. His aunt is a constitutional court judge. I didn't know this at the time, who's a former politician, also at the EU level, with a healthy track record in corruption and extensive contacts with women in the Croatian family justice system, which has been embroiled in scandal for a few years now. So I don't think Judge Kurzel wanted to do this, but as things emerge, I don't know what he's got mixed up in, but I hope that it's not of his free will. That I rather suspect that he has been lent on in some way, and we'll start to look at the rather serious forces that I think are mixed up in this. Which way am I going? Wrong way. Here we go. So this is the spread from the first of those in-depth reports. The headline is Judges Against Children. Yeah, a few things coming out of here. For example, something leaps out at me of 23 adoptions, adopting couples, adopters, or adoptive parents. Only 3 of them had addresses in the territory of the court that the adoption was processed in. And the main court where this was happening is the one in Zlatar, which you can see here. I think that the last time I looked, more than 120 adoptions were identified after some kind of investigation, or something like, I don't know if they were all adoptions, but something about individuals. I don't know if all of them were children, but it looks like the majority of them happened at the court where my children's cases were being heard. So some of the other little bits and pieces that I can see here are, the cases were given, there should be assigned randomly to judges. There is a system for random assignment of cases to avoid conflict of interest, but these cases, the journalist discovered, were clearly given to certain preferred judges. But the point I mentioned about, the jurisdiction of the courts, we can't just rock up to any court we fancy and say, yo, bro, I want to do this, that, or the other. We go to our local court, which has jurisdiction for, our local area. That's how it works. So there's clearly something odd going on there. They also found that the names of the biological parents were missing from the documentation. I'm not going to go on. I'm going to sort of continue through these slides because there's rather a lot of them. So I just want to show the scale of the investigation. Next day, you can see at the bottom here, second continuation of the serial, just peeping it under the bottom. So again, it's front page news. Again, huge, it's a 4-page spread, huge headline, Judges Against Children. There's so much here. I mean, I can read Croatian, but I can't read it that well. So I struggle to read something of this volume and seriousness. So I've never read all of these articles in depth, but I really do need to, and I need to try and sort of transmit this information, I think, to the international community. Next day, again, a 3-page spread. It says the secret files in the My Family scandal. I think the name of this, My Family is the name of the adoption agency run by a former intelligence agency official here. That is SOA here. That's the name of the intelligence agency where my ex used to work. I don't know who that is, whether that's her being taken in for questioning or something like that. I don't think so, unfortunately. No, I don't think there's, well, there is a little bit that's in English language, you know, if you Google it, you can find out. But it hasn't really made much of an impact, you know, sort of in the international media. I'll go on, next page, again, front page news. Price of adoption, 120,000 kuna. That was the previous Croatian currency. Now they've switched to euro, but I think at the time we're probably talking about 15,000 pounds, a little bit, a similar amount in euro. But then it says, but more for 4,700, but an extra $4,700 for lawyers, for anti-malaria medicine, $500, $600 for 2 photographs, for an interview with the minister, which minister, I'm not quite sure, $200. Why would anybody need an interview with the minister? So I think what emerged was that these adoptive couples, or they weren't always couples, I think according to the law in some of these countries, it's not allowed, you know, for single or unmarried parents, I'm not quite sure which, to adopt couples, but you know, that was just one of the many, many, many irregularities that they found in these cases. This next day's 3-page spread is titled Fight for Identity. It was about the documentation which was missing the names of the children's adoptive biological parents, meaning that they would never be able to trace them. This really resonates with the stuff that we were hearing about the cases from Ireland, about the woman who found out that she had 3 birth certificates and, you know, falsified documentation, etc., etc. Yeah, it says here of 54 case files, only in one of them did the judge order the adopting couples, the adopters, to introduce or to sort of let the children know about their biological mothers. In the vast majority of the cases, there was no mention of the children's biological parents. Yeah, I can't, there's more details here. I really would have to go into it. Yeah, and then this is the final one of the series, The Perfect Crime. This is something that they've copied, obviously, from a UN site. It's saying payments by agencies or prospective adopters to residential care facilities must be prohibited. Oh, yes. So I think that the adopting couples were being asked to make donations to certain organizations in Congo, I think. All sorts of things coming out. Yeah, so I think that, you know, they actually went into this without realizing that they were getting into something which was not legal, and then they were flown out to Zambia and they were told, oh, but you need to pay this and you need to pay that and you need to pay this, etc., etc., etc. And so I think probably, well, some of them might have been as surprised as any to find themselves arrested on, you know, human trafficking charges. And some couples who'd already adopted to find out that, in fact, there was a question being raised about the legality of the adoptions. Down in the corner here, there is a professor of law who says that he is making a distinction between child trafficking for the purposes of exploitation and trafficking for the purposes of establishing I would say, fulfilling a desire for parenthood. But he says, but both of them are forms of abuse which are motivated by profit. Yeah, was there anything else I wanted to say about that? Yeah, this is new announcement from the UN the Committee on Enforced Disappearances. So I'm just trying to put the timeline together in my head. There was an interview with an official from Zambia testifying in Geneva, saying this was not the first time this group had crossed the border with children. They had been accused of illegal detention, and investigations had been carried out with the Congolese authorities, establishing that their documentation was fake. Oh yes, something else, a very, very important point that I wanted to say about the Croatian investigation, the media investigation. Something I cannot get out of my mind was they said the judges exercised less care, over the due diligence of the Congolese paperwork to establish that it was authentic than if they had been importing household pets. Yeah. The reason why I was hesitating about the timeline was because I can see the date here, 21st of March 2023. By this time, I had packed up with my children and fled Croatia because they were not wanting to be separated from me. They didn't want to be court ordered back to their dad. They were struggling in school. One of my children has suspected autism spectrum issues. I could see that they were unhappy, struggling. They were complaining about feeling ill, stomach aches, stress, crying, begging me not to force them. So I said, you know what? No, I'm not going to do this anymore. Obviously there's a serious problem at this court. If they've done all of this, then there is a very, very high chance that what I've been saying for all of these years about our case was correct, and that the way that the courts dealt with it was unlawful and wrong. So I was like, okay, over my dead body, are they going to continue to torture you and me? If you want to stay here, you can. So unfortunately, what often happens in these cases happened to us, that Dad applied to the court for an emergency measure to have the children taken by force. So we were living under siege in our flat, waiting for the police to potentially come and break the door down. We have recordings of social services and the police coming and wanting to come in and interview the children. I was not going to let them in by this point. I realized that these are not people that you can trust. And eventually, after living like that for a month, I realized that we had to get away. So interestingly, on the 1st of January 2023, Croatia joined the Schengen area, which meant that there were no longer border restrictions between Croatia and the rest of the EU. I have not had my passports for the children since their father took them in 2016. I've begged the courts, to do something about that, but they have not. So my children have been imprisoned in Croatia, literally since 2016, except for when I've managed to get them out. So we left. I have a video of my children celebrating being out of Croatia, and we decided, they said to me, let's move on. This was just after we crossed the border. It was really terrifying. They said, Mum, let's get as far away as possible. We got to Vienna. I made a call to the British Embassy. I've been begging for help from my MP, from the UK Ministry of Justice, from the Foreign Office for years, because the embassy for years, because it's clear what's going on. But they're like, oh, we can't do anything, So I thought, okay, maybe they will. Maybe if I get the children out, then maybe they'll protect them. One call with the embassy in Vienna went well. The second call, I spoke with somebody who was really not very pleasant at all. And by that point, I realized that if I remained in an EU country, I was not going to be protected against Croatia, which is another EU country. And I realized that our options were looking like at that time were asylum. So we went to Switzerland and we registered for asylum from torture and cruel and inhuman treatment, subjecting me and my children to unlawful separation over a period by this point going on for 6.5 years, I think it was. Myself being, falsely labelled with mental health issues, risks of me being arrested or sectioned on false mental health grounds, and persecution. I mean, this is literal persecution. It's happening to many, many, many of us, regardless of whether it's you're a victim of abuse or you're being falsely targeted by child protection authorities just for trying to do your best for your child. So we made it to Switzerland and it didn't go well at all. It was quite horrific the way we treated, and I think some of it is stupidity. So at the asylum centre, they were like, well, you can't seek asylum because you're, British citizens or British and Croatian citizens seeking refuge from Croatia, which is an EU country. And I said, well, Switzerland isn't an EU country. I was told, well, it might as well be. We do have right to asylum, or at the very least, we had the right to apply for asylum and to have that application processed, based on the evidence which I was able to present to them. Also because of being white, but because being European. But I think that the immigration authorities have not been told that, persecution on these grounds, gender-based violence or, I'd say sort of institutional abuse, state violence, which is happening in EU member states, United Kingdom, United States, etc., 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 is legitimate. And I suppose it opens a bit of a, legal and political can of worms, but maybe we need to sort of get honest about some of these things. But cut a long story short, the very next day, some police officers came to visit, and I went happily with them, with the children, to make a statement, as I believed, because I had been transparent about, why we came, why we were seeking asylum. I had plenty of evidence with me. My children were put into an orphanage, into a children's home that very instant. That caused such severe trauma to my children. And the reason why they were, I will be completely explicit about this, their father reported me to the police and said that I was an extreme danger to my children, that the children should be separated from me immediately, upon our location. One of my sons, the one with potential autism spectrum disorder, asked to be taken to hospital because he was in such a state of distress and panic lasting days that he was having problems breathing. He was having heart palpitations. He couldn't sleep. He was having visual disturbances, and both of the children, if nothing else, the Swiss Child Protection Authorities reported faithfully that the children were terrified of being returned to Croatia. So then the Hague child abduction charges came, and I was prepared for them because this was the third child abduction case I'd been through. And so it was an absolute disaster, an absolute nightmare. I think that I received notice on the Tuesday of the charges, and I think that we were given a date for court. I think it was the Friday. I had to find a lawyer and brief him for an extremely complex case. in like 2.5 days. But I was prepared for it. And I found the lawyer that I ended up with, he was lovely. I won't say that for every lawyer that I've come across in these 7.5 years. But he said to me very clearly, I sort of said to him, I've researched all of this stuff for a long time, and I think that, mothers and parents in our situation, we've become experts. We read the laws with a fine-tooth comb. There's nowhere, that we're not looking for answers. He said to me at the end of the thing, he said, I've learned a lot from you, and I really enjoyed working with you. And he put forward my arguments, and he respected them. But he told me, the judges do not consider that human rights are relevant to family law cases. And he was absolutely right. This is what's happening to us. I'll take a sip of water and just let us absorb that fact for a moment.
You want a tea break?
I'm good, thanks. I'm on a roll. Yeah. And there are dear, dear people who've helped me and supported me through all this, and I'm grateful to all of you that we're all here and we're all together in this. So, in the hearing, I told the story about everything that happened to us, including the Congo scandal, and it was a panel of judges. Sometimes people say, maybe if we had a panel of judges, it would be better because then it wouldn't be so biased as a single judge. Another point that I'd like to make is in Switzerland has got an excellent national law on the implementation of the Hague Convention on International Parental Child Abduction. The reason is because there was a sort of a group in Switzerland that tried to lobby the Hague Conference, and the group of, nations who are signatories for changes to the Hague Convention, which really have been recognized, internationally as being deeply, deeply unjust and harmful to the interests of children, especially. But those attempts did not fall on fertile ground. So they did a very smart thing. They enacted their own national law to sort of, let's say, clarify, certain points. And it's a good law. The trouble is, and this is important for us all to understand, that good laws mean nothing in courts where there is no transparency, where there is no accountability, and where judicial discretion is unlimited. And so those judges went against my children's pleas to be allowed to stay with their mum and go back to England as they'd asked for years, and to be allowed to live a normal life. They went against, the children were given their own lawyer who fought tooth and nail for them. She was very good. She said to the judges, these children cannot expect to have good life outcomes if they are forced back into Croatia. They will not have good and happy childhoods. The courts violated those facts. They violated the things that I was talking about, Congo, they're not just speculation. These are, well, now have kind of, let's say, partly been vindicated, but only partly. I'll explain why it's only partly in a second. I was talking about press reports and, things which are really documentable, but they said that because my testimony was so compelling, it just showed how the children had no chance to withstand the barrage of indoctrination from me. And indoctrination is a euphemism for alienation. So it means that all evidence and allegations of abuse are undermined, covered up, and the person who is trying to protect their parents is recast as the abuser. Well, maybe they didn't exactly go that far, but I don't know. I don't even know where we are now with legal stuff and things. My mum reads my court judgments. She knows what's in them and she says it's horrendous. But I don't care because I do not consider them legitimate. So yeah, my children, the court authorized the police to use force to take my children. They hurt my children, they hurt me. And what I witnessed, and I have got video evidence of some of it, it was a slick child trafficking operation. The Swiss definitely know what they're doing. And since that happened to us, I found out a lot of things which other people over this weekend have alluded to about various forms of child trafficking in Switzerland, including through child protective services, but also very, very unsavory information, allegations about satanic abuse and ritual abuse. I've been told that Switzerland is one of the prime sort of, let's say, hotspots for child trafficking and abuse in Europe. So that was a good decision, wasn't it? And for me to go to Switzerland thinking it's the country of human rights and the law. What I've also been told is that Switzerland harbors criminals, including a man who lobbied tooth and nail for the Hague child abduction, Hague inter-country adoption, laws to be introduced into European law, part of the adoption lobby, and involvement in the abuse and enslavement of children through the adoption industry. Mia, would you like to ask a question?
No. Once, can you hear me? I had my mute. Okay. I wanted to kind of introduce like race, especially in America. I don't think you probably have a lot of Americans on the call. I've just been listening for the last couple of hours, but it's not more of a question. It's more of an experience to share. Yeah, and maybe to also highlight the role of economic devastation, especially by race, especially in America.
Awfully, I would like to maybe just get to the end of my piece and then
sure, exactly.
Open the floor. Yeah,
that's fine. I'm going to mute.
All right. Thanks so
much. Listen, Natalie, I am so sorry. I wrote it in the chat.
Thank you.
And I know how brave and difficult it is to speak on this. So thank you.
Thank you. Maybe it's cathartic for me. I'll sleep well tonight.
Sometimes, yes.
Yeah. So what happened after that? Despite, this is an article dated June the 19th, the Croatian authorities deemed that the adoptions of the Congolese children were legal. DR Congo withdrew from the Hague inter-country adoption agreement exactly because there were too many irregularities around the adoptions. There's too much corruption. So that had the intent of stopping the adoptions. But I think that what the Croatian authorities did, and I'd have to be sure, it didn't read all of the very extensive reporting on this, but it's difficult to remember now, but maybe there isn't actually a law sort of preventing inter-country adoption between DR Congo and other countries, but there is a law against child trafficking. So if we go back to, let me see, where are we? Back to Zambia, which is where the Croatian people were detained. They had to go to court in Zambia. So the question was, how would the Zambian authorities treat this? Well, they were cleared of child trafficking charges and released and given the green light to leave Zambia with the children. The person who wrote this article, Aurora Weiss, she is, I believe, some she has some connection with one of the UN bodies. I'm not exactly quite sure what the story is, and she works as a journalist. So she's one of the rather few people that did much investigation into this. What I've heard through back channels is something that the Croatian people who I know, who know very well how things operate in Croatia, feared that there was political interference, that there were rumors that the United States was putting pressure onto the Zambian authorities. And what Aurora Weiss apparently has learned and has evidence of is that Zambia had a historic debt towards Yugoslavia, which broke up in the 1990s, and Croatia is one of the constituent states of the former Yugoslavia and had inherited part of that debt. So apparently the Americans brokered a deal to, I wonder if you are all right in the comments, brokered a deal to forgive that debt towards Zambia in return for clearing those Croatian nationals and allowing them to leave. So why would the United States do that? Well, it's my belief that because of the adoption lobbies, there's a very, very, very strong influence from the United States on legalizing the adoption industry and inter-country adoptions. So that's where my interest with inter-country adoption sort of was sparked, and that's how I started to make connections with people on Twitter who have been active in anti-child trafficking in Europe for quite, well, many years now, including Roly Post, who spoke yesterday, another gentleman called Arun Atole, who is Indian, who was trafficked to Germany from India as a child, and has been fighting to learn of his mother's identity for years and is helping others. And what I learned from them is stories like this I've just told you in Croatia have happened again and again and again in Europe. I think the ones that stick in my mind are Belgium and the Netherlands. I can't quite remember because I went into Google to try to find the documentation, but some of it has proved a little bit difficult to find. The anti-child trafficking website has been changed, and I got a lot of errors, so I wasn't able to dig out the relevant information in time. But I believe I think it was the Dutch government that resigned at one point over exactly this kind of scandal in trafficking children from Africa into Europe. This lady, I became aware of her because her mother is the former head of the Croatian Child Protection Clinic in Croatia, who was forced to resign after a scandal broke out there in 2021. And her daughter, this lady, I think is currently the deputy of the children's ombudsman in Croatia. Now, the children's ombudsman has received so many complaints from Croatian parents, so that this whole story is very, very hot in Croatia right now, and has been for a long time. And this caught my eye in her CV, which I think is of concern. It says here that she is a member of the Frontex group for monitoring joint, I think that means EU flights for the forced return of migrants. Something that I heard from the United States is that these flights are waived through immigration authorities and are very little monitored. And so it's interesting to me that this lady, with her mother's connection with all of the scandals about everything that's happening in Croatia, has this position in an EU body. It also concerns me about my ex-partner, ex-husband, who since, well, just earlier this year, I found that there were reports that he'd been engaging in activities which he really shouldn't have been, and he also works in border control. People who engage in the things that he's been accused of, which are, well, maybe I better not say it, I have gone public about it, they're eminently blackmailable. And this is one of the things which I think is causing a lot of the problems that we're dealing with. People in positions of power who do things that they shouldn't end up having, sort of Damocles over their head. People can blackmail them, and, I don't know, maybe I'm being a bit incoherent about that, but I think that's part of, why we can't get lawful outcomes, because of institutional, wrongdoing, paedophilia, illicit, sort of homosexual relations, people who don't want to come out and afraid of being outed, etc., etc. Yeah, obviously these are just sort of allegations a little bit. This is another slide up from this lady's CV, which shows that she's got links with chambers of, that's your word, chambers, Jane, of lawyers or barristers in London, where she, which specialises in human rights and international criminal law. Well, if she's the Deputy Children's Ombudsman, why is she not picking up on the human rights violations and crimes being committed in children's cases? At the bottom also, it says that she was a volunteer in an NGO on child trafficking. I'll just leave that there. Oh, so sorry. I think that, yeah, that's the end from my piece, and I'm sorry if I've gone on, and I do appreciate, I didn't want actually to lead this. I was trying to look for actually people who are more qualified than me to talk about race. But when I wrote up a Substack article about this, I can pop it in the link. When I was thinking about the treatment of these African children, and thing I've forgotten to say, also, as well as Zambia dropping charges, the Croatian authorities saying that they don't consider these adoptions to have been illegal, despite the procedural irregularities, and that they're not going to follow up to see where all of these 120 plus individuals have finished up. People worry about what happened to those people, to those individuals, those children or adults. When I was campaigning in Croatia, I was going and doing some protests, and I was outside one particular court, and a Roma family came up, and they said that they had lost 9 children and they didn't know where they were, and they didn't know if they were alive. And there were people on this call who will sympathize with that. By law, they shouldn't be severing links with birth families like that. They should be doing, I think it's called life history work with children, to help them to maintain their roots with their biological families if they have to be removed and put for adoption, which most of them do not and should not. But there are concerns, and I have to say this, in Croatia, that Roma families are being targeted because interestingly, Croatian hospitals, Croatia is quite leading in organ transplantation. And there is concern over human trafficking for organ harvesting. This is something that is very little talked about, which absolutely makes everybody's blood run cold, and we don't even like to think about it. But there are certainly there is reason to believe that these things do happen. What happened to the people from Congo? I don't know. And just maybe a final word about the adoption industry. What I have heard, and I said yesterday in the part about where we were talking about Romania, different children attract different price tags, and different those children can attract different payments from buyers in different countries. And these appear to be the motivations that are driving the taking of children, the separation of children from their families, and forced adoptions. and inter-country adoptions, and not the consideration of the best interests of the child. And when you think about it, about, you know, the considerations of which child attracts which different price tag where, is this not a form of, we're not back in the days of the slave trade? And I think even, you know, white children adopted to white families, I've heard somebody say to me, I think it might be somebody on this call, when you're adopted, you are taken from your family, you have, you know, a wound inflicted on you, your identity is severed, and you're forced to play the part of being a child to a family which is not yours. Maybe it's not, doesn't feel like that to everybody, but certainly it does to some. So with that, I'd love to end, and Mia, if you'd like to speak, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Okay.
Thank you for listening, everyone.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
You know what? I'm gonna do the video, although I'm really not so presentable. Let me see.
Come as you are, we all come as we are.
Maybe I won't, because you know what? I'm doing it on my big screen, but I'm here. I just when I saw the topics, and I saw this, you know, race and slave trade, and I've been in family court for 12 years. And sometimes it's hard to condense 12 years into the trauma that you've endured for 12 years. But there was custody battle. I did not lose custody. I had my parental rights lessened. And then I got a new judge, and I, you know, have custody. In fact, you know, my kids have no relationship with their abusive father. But as a Black woman, and my grandfather told me that his grandmother was a slave. So, I mean, it is so resonant. It's not that far away. My grandfather, who I knew till I was 22 years old, told me of his grandmother and the webs on her back. And one of the main tenets and the most painful part of slavery was the disintegration of the family. You would lose your children would be sold. So that's a trauma that is so deep in the, you know, the Black community. And here in America, you know, in terms of like foster care and children being removed from their homes, basically for poverty. You know, if your lights get turned off, or if somebody comes to your home and you don't have enough food, that is, you can get in the system and they can take your kids. And I've seen that. But that was not me. That was, you know, I was in the divorce court, the family court, but it's the same people who make those decisions. And so, and I want to say this too, because, you know, even if you're not a racial minority, when you take your kids away from you, that's excruciating pain. I mean, that's a pain that, you know, is hard to survive. And especially unfairly. I mean, all of this is unfair for the most part. But there's a few things that I want to share from my 12 years of experience. I have fought. I have talked to probably 35 to 40 attorneys. I've had several. Most of them weren't worth a dime. But the willingness of judges to impoverish my kids, impose the most destructive conditions on them, has just, it scarred us all so deeply. And for example, I live in New Jersey, and New Jersey is considered a progressive state in America, right? Progressive is the northern state, you know, more caring, supposedly. We are the #1 state in America for taking children, this is like for CPS, from their families, Black children from their families, #1. Not Texas, not Mississippi, not some of these southern states. They take children from their homes, especially Black and Latino children. What they did in my instance, I did not lose custody. I didn't, so I must say that. But I saw that coming, and they were impoverishing us. like literally the progressive part of New Jersey, like even if you're divorced, you have to pay for your kids to go to college because they don't want, supposedly, children of divorce suffering relative to children of non-divorce. That's an unfair society, right? You have kids, support your kids. The courts have decided, and I've been in court for 12 years, and I don't mean 12 years once or twice a year. I've been in court probably over 80 times. I've stopped counting. I stopped counting at 50. But they decided that neither one of my kids deserves for their father to help go to college. As a result, I have debt for that. They have debt for that. It's just been such a horrible experience for them. But for instance, during the 12 years of custody, the judge had my youngest son switching homes every night because his father would constantly ask for more time. And literally, one lawyer who was a domestic violence group helped me get an attorney. I mean, because the other thing, when you're in court for 12 years, unless you're a millionaire, you're not going to be able to afford an attorney, And he said, why is she making your son switch homes every night? And I explained the pattern of how that had come to be. He just kept on asking, and eventually said, oh yeah, you can have Tuesday night, and then you can have Thursday night, and then and then the weekends. So literally, he was switching homes every night. And I'm like, he said, that's so inhumane. And I'm like, of course they don't care about your kids. And I mean, my ex he deserves like his own book, about how controlling and devastating he is. But one of the things he decided to do was like, since the boys reject, because when they get teenagers, they don't want to be around abuse anymore. I mean, when you're 8 and 9, you might be scared, but when you're 14 and 15, you're more like, no, I can't tolerate that. That's a lot of kids, not all kids. But he was going to destroy them. I have letters that he wrote to their private school saying, please don't graduate the oldest. That will help me get custody of my youngest, because our oldest child wasn't seeing him. So if under my care, this child would not graduate high school, then that would help him gain custody of really both kids. But that's the kind of, it has been such a systematic oppression of my kids. And one of the things is like the things that I worry about, especially for Black people, for Latino people, for minorities, racial minorities, is a lot of us don't have the financial support, or the resources, the wealth gap. And therefore, after, several years in family court, and you're getting a lot of unfair judgments, and you're in court all the time, I've probably spent $35,000 on photocopies. No lie, and transcripts is another several $1,000s. But what I think is a very underreported story is that the amount of minority children that are taken from their homes, be it in family court for foster care or even in divorces, and it's astronomical, and it's disproportionate to the population. And the other thing I just like, as we debate these issues and how to improve the situation, I understand that there's nothing worse than losing your kids. And that's the kind of trauma that, I know. I to survive this ordeal, I've met dozens of women. I was in grassroots organizations, and I've sat by, and my heart has raced as women have told their stories, and they don't see their kids anymore, or they pay to see their kids in supervised custody. And I know that trauma. I know that because I had GAL reports and all the grifting that these fake psychologists and fake experts do, and say, oh no, she should see her kids on the weekends in the summer, but that's the kind of like things that make your life just miserable, and you fight that, and I fought that, and I fought that. And I got rid of the judge. So I've had some victories. I mean, but it has been such a cost on my life. And our life has become such a spectacle. I had a hearing on Friday. I am being sued for back child support. And back child support for an adult, it's like $80,000. It's like, how I have no $80,000 to pay. He has not paid a dime for his children to go to college. But I'm still in court. It's like it's beyond, like, I don't even know what to say. It's ridiculous. But I do know that I have never met anyone who's had an amount of extreme economic devastation as me and my two kids. And the proof is overwhelming that the father has, acted in such disregard for them. I mean, I have the email saying, please don't graduate him, because this will help me in custody. And they don't care that the father is trying to create bad outcomes. And I'm in court for 12 years. And the other point I just wanted to make is that we can focus a lot on the law, and Nataly touched upon this. But what I know is, like, I've read the law, I've read it very carefully. It does not get applied. So when you spend a lot of time, like, putting in this provision or eliminating this, and I can tell you, they do not listen to the law. The law is not applied to me. The law, there's their beautiful case law in New Jersey about it doesn't matter. You can't divorce your children. You must support your children. I mean, beautiful, learned, expressions of support your kids. And that doesn't mean a thing. I mean, court about alienation. The back child support is because neither kid now is speaking to their father. So it's like, and the record of his abuse is so well documented. And it's completely ignored. So that's the other thing. But it's the whole feeling of being in family court and losing custody of your kids is an act of slavery. And I remember I saw 12 Years a Slave several years ago, and I was in the midst. I was just kind of at the beginning of my court trauma. And when the slave owner decided she wanted to see the little kid, and the mother had no control, and I'm like, my God, I feel that. This judge had decided that my kid needs to switch homes every night. What kind of life is that for a kid to live there for like 4 or 5 years? And it was so traumatic. But that connection, as much as everybody on some level feels that when they're in family court, if you are a racial minority, it is another level of intensity, because in your history, you've probably become aware of the pain of that and the legacy of that and the disintegrated family and the weaker ties and the sense that you mean nothing. It's so incredible that kind of legacy, and you see it, repeated in the family courts in the year 2024. It's really, really overwhelming. And I'm glad you broached the subject, because I think it's important. And I'm going to end on a positive note. I got my first judge removed from my case. And I'm going to credit God. I'm not particularly religious, but I know I was fighting as hard as I could. And she had inflicted incredible damage on me and my kids. But I spoke the truth of what she was doing, how she was like, I mean, I think she was giving poverty aid to my kids. And they removed her. And it was no reason given. My trial started anew after 4.5 years. But I know that I got the word out that this woman was causing a lot of damage. It was extremely devastating. It was against common sense. I mean, you really don't need experts to say, a child needs to switch houses every day? A man doesn't need to pay for college for his kids. A man needs to take his ex to court, 12 to 15 times a year. That kind of stuff is ridiculous. So I say all that because I mean there's a way to deal with this, but the other thing is it's very hard to hear. We don't want to think of ourselves, or we don't want. And the other thing is, in New Jersey, judges aren't even elected; they're appointed. So the corruption is so embedded, and my hands would be bleeding from having knocked on doors to get this woman to get her judicial position taken away. But there's no avenue for that, when they're appointed, and it's a challenge to get the story told. The story is nasty, the story is ugly, and but I do want to say that race, as bad as it is for everyone, I can honestly say, and I know many, many women in America who have endured this, and to me, they've endured worse than I have because they've lost their kids. I don't know if I could have survived that, and I didn't want to go because I can tell you, I felt like I was going to die in the midst of sometimes of this, and not die from like self-inflicted harm, but just, my soul was dying because of what I was going through and what the cost to your kids, So there's a way to deal with this. I think we have to speak openly and honestly. And sometimes I cringe because when I hear people say, "Oh, well, I don't want money." I don't want money. And of course we don't want money. We want our kids, but we do want our kids, especially in a place with very few social network in America. I mean, very bad. Money is a factor. So when you're in court for decades, or you're trying to borrow money for an attorney, or you just have to make copies or get transcripts, or that takes away from your life. And unless you're a very wealthy person, that's the other thing. They know that they can decimate us. They can decimate us in court. And it's a system where I think, and that's why I know you guys are a lot of you are European, and it seems a little different, but it's very much the same. I mean, the made up lies, the taking of children, the oppression of women, the bias towards the wealthier, more connected, powerful party. But I think, the arc of justice does, it's a long road, but it bends towards justice. So, and I know sometimes I've talked to enough women, you've been through so much, you start at the beginning, you start at the end, it's so intense. And I've left out a lot of stuff, but, and I see, when I hear a glimpse of stories, like someone was chatting about a school. My sons, I mean, we were very upper middle class Americans. My kids went to private school. And when my ex started writing them emails demanding that they not graduate my son, they followed him. They did exactly as he wanted. And I can tell you, I would have never thought that they would do that, but they did it. And I can tell you two things. He'll sue you at a drop of a hat. And that scares people. And that's one reason I've heard the media doesn't, because these suits are baseless, but they will sue you and you will have to defend yourself. So that is one of the things that they do. But they also are scared of him. I've got to tell you, he's not violent in the classical sense, but he's violent in the crazy sense. What goes to extremes. Once I was going to take the kids on a play date, he called the police, because he didn't want us. That's the kind of crazy, just extreme behavior. And I was scared we were all scared of him at one time. But so there's a whole nother system that reacts. And I do wonder sometimes, if we weren't a Black family, would they have done that? I mean, I had to sue the school for my son's transcripts and diploma because they withheld them, because he didn't want my son to enroll in college. Because if he had a really bad outcome, that would make me look as a bad parent, and he would have a better chance to get custody. So you'll get disappointed along the way. Oh my God, it is just a sobering experience. But there's a lot of good out here. I appreciate, Nataly, you doing this. This is a lot of work. I know personally I wanted to help, and I'm like, I can't help more than sharing my story right now because I am still in court. And sometimes I cannot tell you how devastated I feel that 12 years, my kids are grown, but I am being back sued. And, you know, you talked about jurisdiction, and I'm going to stop now because I could go on forever, but I no longer live in the county where my case is being heard. I haven't lived there for 6 years. I have asked on 2 separate motions, I don't live there, please move me to another county where I currently reside. They refuse to. And it's like, long as something's active, we can't move your case. And I'm thinking that's just bullshit, because something is always active. I don't know. I no longer live in I haven't lived there for 6 years, it's almost 7 years now. And they won't move me because I think, you know, I got that judge removed and there's a lot of retaliation against me. And I'm a big mouth. I speak the truth, as ugly and nasty as it is, to whoever. And that's how I got her off my case. But I think I must be punished for it. And that's what's happening. But, you know, there's a lot of work and organization to get done, a lot of understanding that needs. I'm so glad you're brave enough to mention the race angle, because this is such a horrifying ordeal that sometimes we don't look at the layers of it. And they're in there, though. They're in there. And I think it's helpful. It makes us a more, I think, effective organization when we know that. And I think minorities need to get more involved because, you know, domestic violence is really worse among the minority communities, as quiet as that's kept. And I don't know if it's quiet. A lot of people know it. You know, Native Americans, Latinos, Blacks have higher rates of domestic violence than the white majority population. But it's as you get involved in trying to improve the situation, I think it's good to recognize what's happening, the reality of it, and the differences. So thank you for including this topic.
Well, thank you very much. I'm really glad that it landed, because I've come across communities in the UK where, you know, there are a lot of, you know, minority families who are saying that they're being targeted by child protection services. And so I did hope that there would be more people who'd be able to speak directly about this. And I sort of hope that opening the topic might invite, you know, more people to come forward. So maybe in the future we could have more discussion about this, where people can speak for themselves, you know, their own experience. I'd really love that. Actually, you spoke so eloquently. Thank you very, very much indeed. I'm glad to connect with you. Alison, would you like to speak?
Yes, I can echo and speak on this topic because my experience has been that of the ex-husband's family are solicitors, so they had that network. The outcome was that I was still seen as primary carer by a day as such, but I've always been the primary carer of our child. And when it came to the divorce, the finances of the divorce, I was left without a home as the primary carer. So me and my son were left without a home. He was able to hold on to the family home, although stated is I remember clearly his barrister stating that he can't afford the family home, but the judge just concocted some kind of mishmash of things, because at a point I was stay-at-home mom. I wasn't allocated, although he asked for a pension report to be done, which identified that a section of his pension should be awarded to myself because of being a stay-at-home mom and not working during that time. That wasn't allocated in the divorce. All sorts of things that allowed him to stay in the home, the family home, and me and my son to be out of the family home without any provision for a home. And even my barrister, who I ended up not trusting and seeing the back, you know, the corruption and how they turned. I've even got a note from him stating that he'd emailed the judge and said, what you've done is not right, it's not fair. It not being legal, the judge can do what he likes in the proceedings, but it wasn't fair. I then appealed, and the appeal judge says the judge might not be wholly accurate, but it's not something that he feels needs to be adjusted. But then asked my barrister if I needed the pension. It was online, so I wasn't able to speak up or anything. My barrister just didn't say a word, because I do believe that there's that underlying corruption that barristers, solicitors, and what know when to speak up and know when not to, because it will affect their career or their progression or whatever. So I've also experienced the fact that, yeah, my son was also in private school. Ex decided he wasn't paying, stopped paying. Court then put an order in that he should pay. Again, my barrister at the time, all this emotional thing was going on, and the final hearing, my barrister said to me, "Oh, you know, you need to take out things around the school, take out information around your son and his disability. The financial hearings have nothing to do with that." And me, like an idiot, said, okay, because I'm trusting my barrister. Since then, obviously, the ex has not paid for school, for our son's education. He's actually refused to be paying child support through the child maintenance support. He keeps sending information to child maintenance support saying that our son is in 50-50 care between the two of us. It's an absolute lie. He lives with me completely. But it does feel like that slavery thing that you mentioned, because I do, when it all happened, I felt like, are we in the 1820s or 1720s? That, you know, as a mother with a child with full responsibility, we're left without a home. And, you know, and it does feel like a race thing, because I'm a black woman, he's a white man, and I'm out on the streets with a child, and he's in a house that he can't afford, that he could actually, and he has a partner, so they've got a double income. Yet we're out to the home without funding to even purchase our own home. So we're still living with my mother. So yeah, it feels that race and slavery thing hits hard. But at the same time, it's not something you can bring up in court, because they don't, I don't know, acknowledge it.
It seems that they discriminate on every ground imaginable. Yesterday we've got a lovely collective of groups in London who include Black and minority women and men, and also women with disabilities. Now, try being a woman with a disability in a family court as well. That really doesn't go well. Yeah. Yeah. Alison, have you finished? Is it okay if I ask Vicky to?
Yes.
Thanks so much for contributing, Alison. We appreciate that. You able to get off mute, Vicky?
Yes, sorry. It took me a minute or two to work it out. I just was, I mean, having gone through the family court, you know my history, Natalie. Just for other people listening, I've lost touch with my child completely for 4.5 years, and have recently had a non-mol taken out against me by my child, but, you know, with her father's sort of, you know, standing watch over her. One of the things that strikes me with regard to how the family courts operate is that essentially they are operating from a position of confirmation bias. So both Alison and Mia, you know, talking about sort of the idea of bringing up race or sexism or any of those discriminatory practices will simply make the judge come down on you harder. And the idea of bringing up domestic abuse makes most judges hate you because they feel like, you know, it's a deeply patriarchal organization. And so if you know, they see men as protectors of the family. And if you tell them that the man in your situation is not a protector and is kind of going against patriarchal norms, they basically want to shut the lippy woman up. And so what it strikes me is it's incredibly difficult to get these men, whether they're judges or domestic abusers or policemen or what have you, to follow the law, because it's a bit like it kind of completely goes against everything that they want to achieve, which is male supremacy. And so it's almost like no matter how many laws, like they keep talking about the system being broken, but if we look at the system has a lot of the laws in place, but unfortunately none of these guys are enacting it. It's very much like the post office scandal.
Women either, Vicky, some of the worst cases of abusive litigants and of their children I've heard about have been from women who are abused.
I'm not saying that there aren't patriarchal women, of course there are, but they are operating to a system that is designed to benefit men. And that's gone on throughout all of history, so I'm just wondering, it's a bit like whenever we talk about the system being broken, it's a bit, to my mind, it's a bit like us saying that a car is responsible for the drunken driver. The car's got brakes and the car works, reasonably well. It is the operators that we need to be dealing with, whether we have judges that have to undergo psychological testing to, determine whether they've got inbuilt bias. Same with social workers, same with police officers, because ultimately it is the bias that they're operating the system with that is the problem, more in my experience than actually the system itself.
I actually think it's worse than that, Vicky. I think that it's the system is. I've been looking a bit into the history of how this happened, and I'm sort of reeling a little bit from what we heard from Mia and Vicky, about Vicky's, Alison's, sort of account of, being pushed into homelessness. Apparently, this system was designed in the United States in the 80s after the institution of no-fault divorce, first and foremost to punish single Black women. It was really a clamp down against sort of the independence of mothers who wanted to leave abusive relationships. I haven't done as much reading about it as I would like, but I believe that that's where it all traces back to, and that's where the fatherhood movement started, which was started by white male supremacist groups. So this is why we're seeing these outcomes. And I think that the way to get out of it is actually to redesign the system. I think that sort of addressing things like bias and culture are not going to cut it, because the policy is too far deeply embedded inside it.
Okay, I'd be interested to hear a bit more about that, certainly.
Definitely, we can talk about that in the workshops that are coming up later. I just noticed that somebody popped into the chat. Jane, I'm really sorry, I can see you got your hand up, but somebody popped in the chat talking about social workers in the UK, some African and Indian social workers. I wanted to just raise a sort of slight concern also about social work in the UK seems to have an awful lot of problems. It's using a lot of contract social workers. And the trouble with that is they're not permanent employees. When they've done their job, they move on. They're very difficult to trace. And the thing that really concerns me, and even I'm a bit frightened to mention it, was that somebody shared with me details of social workers from a certain country in Africa. I believe it might have been Zimbabwe, where there is an identified problem with social work, that the social workers are not correctly trained, who are coming to the United Kingdom, establishing companies in weird areas like logistics and things, and then getting these social work contracts. And there are quite a few reports of social workers with this profile being quite aggressive towards families. The thing that concerns me is potential trafficking in situations like that. So, you know, it is awful. I mean, the thing is, you know, things like the Congo scandal, you know, couldn't be happening if there weren't corrupt people in Congo who were selling their own children. So, yeah, it's a sort of just a little bit of an awareness point, very unsavory one. But yeah, it's maybe just, you know, worth saying, because I see some campaigners, you know, I know that there are, you know, minoritized families in the United Kingdom who feel that they need more cultural understanding, and that the, you know, targeting of them is due to, you know, white social workers not understanding cultural norms in African families. And I can completely empathize with that. But sort of the flip side is it going to solve all our problems just by fulfilling sort of, let's say, quotas for, you know, sort of social workers, you know, from minority groups, without being a little bit cautious about where they're being employed from, what, you know, what their education levels are. Sorry if that, I hope that's not offending anybody, to just sort of get that out in the open. We've got another session coming up at 7, and I could do with a little bit of a break, because just to have a bit of dinner before we do the sort of workshop part of it. Are you happy if I go on mute? And if anybody wants to continue talking, to sort of, you're welcome to chat away, and I'll be back at 7. Is that okay? All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening. Thank you for listening to my story, and I do sort of apologize about the sort of jarring nature of having a white woman talking about race, but at least, you know, I just really wanted to open up that conversation, and thank you for the people who sort of participated, so that it wasn't me doing it on my own. So all right, see you later folks, and yeah, nearly there, home run now.